Happy Friday, North Texas. I'm Scott, and today is Friday, March 20th. We've got a great conversation on tap today with an alumna who wants to help you reach your full potential. But first, we've got some news to know for our UNT community. Attention UNT students, registration for summer and fall 2026 is now open for seniors and graduate and honors college students. Registration opens on March 26th for juniors, April 2nd for sophomores, and April 9th for freshmen. Make sure to run an online degree audit, check your MyUNT account for any to-do items, or meet with an advisor if needed to secure your classes. Get more information at registration.unt.edu. Join the UNT Alumni Association to celebrate UNT distinguished alumnus Sam Golden and his new memoir, A Golden Legacy, Faith, Family, and a Life of Purpose. A deeply connected and dedicated supporter of UNT, having served in numerous advisory and philanthropic roles and receiving top university honors, Golden's story is a heartfelt reflection on his life rooted in endurance, resilience, and gratitude. An inspiring reminder of the legacy he continues to build at UNT and beyond. This free event at the Gateway Center on Thursday, March 26th includes a book signing and a special fireside chat. Check the link in the show notes for more information and to register. UNT's 2026 Student Portraits Data Symposium is returning to the Gateway Center April 30th. The symposium is an opportunity for UNT faculty, staff, and students to come together and share strategies, tools, and stories that demonstrate how we use data to enrich learning and support student success. This year's theme, Recognizing Every UNT Community Member as an Educator, is inspired by UNT's 5-year strategic plan and its vision that every interaction with a student has transformative potential. This all-day event is free, open to faculty, staff, and students, and I'm told there will be tacos. Check the link in the show notes to register. And now for some athletic news, let's check in with Zach Babb for the Mean Green Minute.
UNT senior diver Cameron Wong made program history on Thursday, becoming the first Mean Green diver to compete at the NCAA Championships. He participated in the 1-meter springboard with a 30th place showing on Thursday. On Friday, she'll participate in the 3-meter springboard. Coming off a series sweep of Tulsa, Mean Green softball is back in action with a road weekend series against UTSA. The first game is a 6 p.m. start on Friday down in San Antonio. That's followed up by a 1 p.m. Saturday matchup and then a noon Sunday battle, all down at UTSA.
Thanks for that update, Zach. Loving that great start to conference play for our softball team. And speaking of women who swing for the fences, I had the pleasure of talking to UNT alumna Mayaria Johnson for this week's episode. Mayaria was president of the UNT Society of Women Engineers before graduating with a bachelor's in computer science in 2015. She's gone on to have an enduring, highly successful career with a Fortune 100 food and beverage corporation. She's also a recipient of the UNT Women Breaking Barriers Eagle Award and even came back to UNT to earn her MBA in Information Technology in 2021. We talked about her time at UNT, how it prepared her for a successful career, and her passion for helping people reach their next level. Tell me about your time at UNT. When did you graduate, and what did you study when you were there?
Yeah, so I like to tell people I'm a 2-time UNT graduate. So for my undergraduate program, I graduated with my Bachelor of Science in Computer Science in 2015. And then my master's in business administration with a concentration in information technology in 2021. Altogether, almost a decade with UNT. As far as my undergraduate experience, I mean, anytime I come back to visit UNT, I'm just always feeling feelings of nostalgia. I really did enjoy my time there, especially, as an undergraduate student. So I stayed on campus all 4 years in the dorms. So I stayed in Crumley Hall my freshman year, and then I stayed in Legends Hall my sophomore, junior, and senior years. So I literally walked everywhere, walked to class, I also worked on campus. I worked in the financial aid office. So I worked there. So if I wasn't walking to class, I was walking to work. If I wasn't walking to class or work, I was likely going to get something to eat. So I loved eating at the the dining halls like Kerr Hall and Bruce Hall. And then at the time, the union before the union that we have now, which still, kind of has the same places to eat, but I like to eat, Chick-fil-A or a boar's head sandwich, before work or, before class. So yeah, I was very much, integrated with the culture at UNT. And I always think back, and it really doesn't feel like it was that long ago, but I really wish that, at the time that I was going to UNT, I didn't have like an Apple Watch or anything to track my steps. I really wish that I had have had something like that, because I'm fairly certain that I, had well over 10,000 steps a day easily. But I really did love it. I loved, when I would walk on campus, I would, listen to my music on my phone. So I would have my headphones in, and, I would just kind of walk and, just try to get my head in the right place. It was the simple things that I really did enjoy about being at UNT. And then being an engineering student, I really loved that we had our own campus. So a lot of my classes were at Discovery Park. So I would, take the bus from the main campus to Discovery Park and back. So I love that. It just felt like we had kind of our own niche community at Discovery Park. So yeah, that was, kind of my time as an undergraduate student. And then as a graduate student, I was going to school part-time, working full-time. So I took a mixture of classes. I took some online, some I had to come to the Denton campus for. So I would often have classes on Mondays. So I'd, work the whole day, and then I'd, drive to the Denton campus and, take my class for, 3 hours. So those were very long days. And then I did have a class or two at the Frisco campus too. So, got a chance to experience UNT in a different way. But yeah, I enjoyed, both kind of my time as an undergraduate student and a graduate student.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious, tell me about, you talked about coming back to campus and kind of feeling that nostalgia. What is you back to campus these days? Are you talking to classes? Are you just coming for, football games or basketball games, or what's bringing you back to campus these days?
Yeah. So mostly it's, coming back to talk to student organizations.
Mhm.
So I recently, was serving as the National Society of Black Engineers, our professional DFW chapter. I was serving as, their ambassador, one of their ambassadors for the UNT Collegiate NSBE chapter. And so, I would often, as part of that ambassador role, would come back to campus and speak to, students in those organizations about, giving them tips about, resumes and, doing mock interviews and just, kind of giving them insight into, what happens after they, graduate, and, just giving them, advice and tips on, how to make the transition. So yeah, that's usually what brings me back. So I've, spoken to UNT, NSBE. Last year, I also, went and spoke to the UNT Society of Women Engineers, which that organization was, a big part of my time at UNT. So same kind of thing. I, went there to kind of share my career journey and, give advice about, what they can be doing now to, best prepare for, their future careers. And then I also spoke to UNT's Her Script organization last year, 2 times last year. So yeah, that's usually what brings me back. And I always enjoy it. I always enjoy driving back onto campus and seeing what new buildings are there, or what buildings are still there, and just kind of reflecting on my own experience.
Yeah. Curious, what made you choose to come to UNT for your undergrad? What made you choose North Texas?
Yeah, so I mean, I chose UNT because I really felt like that strong sense of belonging. I remember when I toured the campus, I just, felt something pulling me
Mhm.
to the campus. Like the atmosphere just felt really welcoming and inclusive, and I just felt like I really belong there. I did apply to other schools. I did tour other schools in Texas. So I knew I wanted to stay in Texas, close to home. So I'm a Dallas native. I'm very close, with my family, especially my mother. So I definitely wanted, unlike most kids, I know most kids like to, get out of the house the first chance they get, but I was different, and I wanted to, kind of be close to home, and so I felt like UNT kind of struck a nice balance. Like I wasn't minutes away from home, but I wasn't hours away from home either. So
Mm.
it was easy for me to, come home when I wanted to, or have, like my mom would come and visit me every other weekend or so, and we would hang out. So that was kind of one of the reasons why I chose, UNT, for the distance, and that, like I said, that sense of belonging that I felt. Also, with other schools, UNT just kind of checked all the boxes for me. So some of the other schools that I had applied for wouldn't actually allow me to declare computer science as my major as a freshman, since I think my ACT and SAT scores weren't, like high enough. So that was, kind of, I guess, what put an X by some schools for me, but UNT, welcomed me with open arms. I was able to declare computer science as my major as a freshman. And I think I started taking computer science classes my second semester at UNT. So, yeah, I just felt like UNT accepted me as I was, for who I was. I felt like I was enough. So, I was able also to get into on-campus housing. So one of the schools I applied for, I was actually having trouble finding housing, and that was really important to me, was to be able to stay on campus, my freshman year. So, and lo and behold, I was able to find space at Crumley Hall. And mind you, this was all, I think, literally like months before, just a few months before the fall semester started. So it just felt like everything just kind of fell into place.
Yeah.
I got into computer science as my major. I got into the dorm, and then I found a job. So everything just kind of, fell into place. And I just knew that that's where I needed to be.
Yeah. So 2 degrees from UNT, lived on campus, worked on campus, obviously just a ton of memories. Tell me about if there's a particular class or professor or student org or just experience, what memories stand out from your time at UNT that have kind of stayed with you or been especially influential for you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was actually part of the honors college. And so as part of that, I had the opportunity to take a leadership course that unexpectedly had a huge impact on me. It was one of my favorite courses, which is probably strange since I'm a computer science major. You would think I would say one of my computer science classes was my favorite, but this leadership course was my favorite because we studied like a lot of different leadership styles and famous leaders, and this class really stood out to me as we were learning about all of these things, because I felt like it was kind of the first step for me in really accepting myself for, who I was and am. And I remember the professor talking about, different personality types and the influence that has on, different people's leadership style. And my professor, she was talking about how she was an introvert. I consider myself an introvert. And I just loved how she talked about it in terms of, it not being a bad thing. I think introverts kind of get a bad name sometimes, but I loved how she, really talked about how she was an introvert, and that, it's not a bad thing. It's not what most people think, and I really felt seen and understood in that moment, because I've had so many people over the years like judge me for how quiet and reserved I am, and they think I'm shy, and really I'm just a person who likes to process things
Mm.
internally. I get energy from doing that. And so this class really kind of helped me understand kind of the reason behind that, and the research behind it, the science behind it, and it just made me, more accepting of myself, because I always felt like, I needed to be this way or that way to be, accepted by others. And this class, really kind of showed me, hey, it's okay to be like this. Like, and there's so many, great leaders out there who, they're not all the same. They don't have the same, leadership, style. They don't have the same personality. So I just felt like that class helped, kind of help validate me in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love hearing stories of those kind of moments of self-discovery that we have in college. Those are great.
Yeah.
So walk me through your career path since leaving UNT. What have you been up to?
Yeah. So UNT actually, led me to the company that I work for now. I'd say, kind of tying back to the previous question, like another, experience that was especially influential for me was, being part of the UNT Society of Women Engineers, which I mentioned, earlier. So while I was an undergraduate student, I was a member of the organization for all 4 years. But then I started taking leadership roles as a sophomore. So I was a webmaster, and then in my junior year, completely unplanned, but I ended up being the president. And I still remember like where I was when we were nominating people for officer positions, and no one raised their hand to be president, and I felt a strong pull for me to raise my hand and to run. So I really made kind of a split second decision to be president, and I really don't think that I'd be where I am in my career if I hadn't been part of UNT SWE, and been in that leadership role. That role, really taught me. In addition to that leadership class I took, being president of UNT SWE really taught me a lot about leadership, about teamwork, about communication, having people play to their strengths, that kind of thing. So in the fall of 2013. So this is when I was junior, getting ready to be a senior. So there was an event that UNT SWE hosted in collaboration with the Career Center at Discovery Park to prepare for the upcoming engineering career fair. And so as part of that, a few employers were there, almost kind of to give us a preview of what they were going to be sharing in the career fair, or be tabling for at the career fair. And so I didn't attend this event with the goal of even like looking for a job. Honestly, I really didn't have any idea what was next for me. The previous summer, I had completed a research experience for undergraduates, or REU. And I think I was thinking about doing that again the following summer. So I really wasn't even really seriously thinking about a job. But while at the event, I was really just there, as president, trying to ensure that the event was running successfully. But something caused me to kind of slow down and stop by the table of my current employer. And I just ended up having a very casual chat with the recruiter about my background. And thankfully, so the career advisor from the UNT College of Engineering Career Center actually had told us like a week or so before the event, like, make sure you have some resumes with you. There are going to be employers here. And I really didn't think about it at the time, like too much about it, but something just told me, just print some copies of your resume out, just put them in your backpack. If you need them, you can, pull them out. If not, leave them in your backpack. So I was really glad that I actually listened to
Mhm.
the career advisor, because I ended up, talking to this recruiter, and we had a great conversation. She asked for my resume. She thought I'd be a great fit for the company. And she told me, how I needed to apply for an internship, that following summer. And so I did. I think I applied, later that evening or maybe the next day. And then within the week, I was interviewing for two positions at the company. So one was like in supply chain, and the other one was in information technology. And so I didn't get the supply chain one, but I'm actually glad that I had the opportunity to interview for that one, because I felt like it gave me good practice for the internship that I actually ended up getting with information technology. And so I interned. I ended up, getting that internship position in information technology. And so I interned there the summer 2014, and then I was given an offer to join back full time after I graduated. So I entered my senior year, and I had a job offer in hand, and so I was really, just grateful for that. And so I've been at this company ever since. It's a global consumer packaged goods company. So I've been there, you know, since I interned there. I've had the opportunity to work with people, all over the world, India, Ireland, Mexico, Spain, United Kingdom, and I've also been in various roles. So I started out in where you would probably expect most computer science students to start out. I started out as a developer on mobile applications, and then I kind of transitioned into different roles, still all within the realm of technology, but I dabbled in so many different spaces like data analysis. Right now, I'm in product management, and so actually starting work there, this is just how UNT is so intertwined with my story.
Mhm.
Starting work at this company actually encouraged me to go back to UNT for my MBA.
Yeah.
So before I even, learned about this job and did the internship, I mentioned before that I was thinking the summer of my junior into my senior year that I would likely do some kind of research experience. I think that I was kind of leaning towards, after graduating with my undergrad degree, that I would go straight into my master's degree. And I was originally planning to actually pursue a master's degree in computer science. And so I was part of the grad track program in the College of Engineering. So I was taking computer science courses as an undergraduate student that would count towards my graduate degree. And so that was kind of the path that I was on. After, I received the opportunity to do the internship and work for the company full time, I thought, let me take a break. I'll take a break from school. Let me, start my career. Before I jump into this master's in computer science, let me see if that's really, the path that I need to take. And so I worked for a year, and I realized that actually I really could benefit from learning more about technology from a business perspective. And so that's what caused me to, veer from the master's in computer science to the MBA in IT. And so that's kind of how I entered my career and then went back to school. And so I know that students often wonder, undergraduate students wonder whether they should, pursue their master's degrees right after they, complete their bachelor's degrees. And, me personally, I'm really glad that I got some work experience under my belt before I went back for my master's, and even, while I was pursuing the master's, because I felt like I was able to, relate better to what we were learning in the classroom, because I was, experiencing what we were learning in the classroom, in the real world. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's kind of how how my career got kickstarted and how I went back to school. And yeah, I've been, like I said, in this industry for since the summer internship, so 2014. So depending on how you look at it, about 11 years.
That's great. You had that career, and then tell me about Next Level You. This kind of, I don't know if side gig is the right term for it, but about Next Level You and what inspired you to work with your mother to put this project together.
Yeah, yeah. So my mom and I mentioned before, the kind of relationship that we have, and we've, really we've always felt kind of this drive to do something together, at least since 2018. That's how far back, my notes for our business ideas go. So who knows, if we may have been even discussing doing something before that, but 2018 is where, when I look back at my notes, that seems to be where we kind of started talking about different ideas. And we just felt like, with her background in education and my background in technology, coupled with our relationship as mother and daughter, we just always thought that we'd make a great team. And we always, like, kind of felt this drive, this push to do something in the realm of, personal and professional development. And we talked about so many different ideas, but none of them really ever kind of got off the ground. I just think it wasn't time. Looking back, I just don't think it was time to really start this journey. But I think the ideation process really helped to, kind of get us to where we are. And so about this time last year is actually when the idea for the podcast, Next Level U, came from UNT's First Script organization. So again, here we go. UNT is, kind of part of a major transition or milestone in my life. And so I presented to the Her Script organization, like I said, about this time last year, delivered a tech talk, is what they call them. And so I discussed my career path and, what I've learned along the way, similar to what I've kind of discussed with other organizations whenever I do, come back to UNT and visit. And yeah, just offered, encouragement and advice for how they should navigate, their remaining years in college, what they should expect once they start their careers. And my mother was there with me. So she's usually always, there with me. I love when she comes with me because we're able to kind of play off of one another. And she'll be able to, hear something that the students are asking that maybe I don't hear, because she used to teach early college, high school students. So essentially knows, how to engage with, students like, those who attend UNT. So she usually is always with me when I do these kinds of presentations. And, her script was, asking questions about, like, how do you overcome, certain challenges in the workplace, like the imposter phenomenon. And so we were, talking through that. I was sharing my perspective. My mom was sharing hers. And so the day after I did the presentation, one of the Her Script members actually said to me, just kind of out of the blue, she's saying, thank you for coming. It was a great presentation. And oh, by the way, I think that it would be great if you and your mom did a podcast together where you talked about, topics like what we talked about when we were there, imposter phenomenon, et cetera. And I was kind of taken aback, like, a podcast, really? I was flattered, but also kind of terrified as well, because, I just never personally really thought that I had the personality to be, like a podcast host, to do a podcast. I just didn't think, I had what it took to be a podcaster. I feel like most podcasters you see are kind of like, radio or television hosts, like they have these big personalities, they're outgoing, and, I'm the complete opposite of that. So it took me, I feel like my mom was sold on the idea quicker than I was, but it took me about a month or so before, I was really convinced that, we could, we could do this. And I ended up, my mom and I ended up taking like a class where we learned about different types of podcasts. And that was really insightful because it kind of helped break that stereotype I was setting on podcasts in my head about how they needed to be and the type of person that needed to be leading them. And I really feel like that's what sets my mother and I apart. So our podcast is probably more, it's very structured. And I'm not going to say that other podcasts aren't, but ours is, I'm sure people can tell that we're scripted, and we are. And that's on purpose. So we're, basically, we'd like to say kind of teaching bite-sized lessons in around 20 minutes about how to reach your next level. So in essence, how to, what skills do you need to reach your next level, whatever your next level is, because we know everyone's next level is different. And your next level is, essentially, it doesn't have to be something major. It could be something as simple as, you want to develop a stronger relationship with yourself or with other people. Or, if it's a college student, it could be, how do I get to my next level, which is, getting into the workforce. Or for someone who's, already in their career, it could be, okay, how do I, change careers? And so while we're not teaching exactly, those bridges, how to, get from a college student to a professional, or how to change careers, or how to build stronger relationships, although we may not be teaching specifically about those things, we're teaching kind of the foundational core skills that we believe are required to get to any next level. And so we're teaching those skills using the letters of the alphabet. So and here we go again with this podcast. It's almost like when we made the decision to start the podcast, it's like everything just kind of fell into place, similar to how, everything fell into place for me when, I decided to choose UNT. Everything fell into place when we chose, to travel this path of starting Next Level You and doing the podcast. And so, like, this idea of structuring the podcast around the alphabet, I think just came to us one morning when we woke up. It just came like a flood. So, and we pretty much know, we're on letter E right now, getting ready to move to the letter F. We pretty much know like what the rest of the alphabet is going to be already, but we're just kind of pacing ourselves, covering one letter per month. And so we started with A for agility. We talked about, how to set and achieve SMART goals using Agile. So using a software development methodology that I've learned a lot about in my career. And then, we progressed to B for belonging. You've heard me talk about belonging a lot. And, that's actually been one of our favorites because we talk about belonging in layers, like how you have to establish this internal sense of belonging before you can really belong in other spaces, like with your family, with friends, at work, in your community. And so that was our B. And then we went to C for confidence. And we talked about, this was a really good one for me. We talked about how, how to own your unique voice, because, confidence doesn't have to look a certain way. Like it doesn't have to be loud or boastful. Like it can be quiet. We also talked about how to use change management concepts. So I had a role in my career where I was a change manager. I was, responsible for ensuring that technology solutions that we were building were, being rolled out effectively to key stakeholders. And so we've brought some of those concepts into, the podcast. And so with confidence, we're teaching about how you can use change management to maintain confidence when you're, navigating uncertainty, and then D for discipline. We're talking about how to build small daily habits, which can have a major impact on your life. And then, E for energy, where we are now, we're talking about how to identify what gives you energy, what drains you energy, and what drains your energy. And so we just firmly believe that you can't get to any next level in your life without learning how to be agile, because things almost never go the way you plan. You can't
Yeah.
reach your next level if you feel like you don't belong. You can't reach your next level if you don't even have the confidence to pursue your next level. You can't reach your next level without discipline, and you definitely can't reach it without energy. So, and I feel like these are concepts, like, you think that these are things that people just know, but I feel that our podcast kind of forces people to reflect on these concepts, probably in a way that they haven't before. So while our episodes are, kind of in that 20-minute range, like they're jam packed with, insights from, my personal experience, my mom's personal experience, our shared life experiences, both, as a family and, professionally. They're packed with those, insights, as well as, research and frameworks that we both, used in our professions. So that's why we really pour a lot into, the content that we curate. And so you'll see that, you'll hear that in the podcast. And so yeah, that's, what inspired us to work together. We just had this strong desire to want to, help people reach their next level, and we wanted to share, kind of our own experiences and, tools to help people, be better and navigate life better.
Yeah. What's been the most rewarding part of it so far, whether it's been, just getting to do this project with your mom and have that experience, or any feedback you've gotten about it?
Yeah. It's been fun working with my mom. We've learned a lot about one another in doing this podcast. And, I love when we get into kind of our brainstorming sessions, because we're just kind of bouncing, ideas off of one another, and, really pours into or culminates to a version of, the podcast that listeners, hear. So yeah, definitely working with my mother is rewarding, and for obvious reasons. And then just the ability to start something from scratch and have like complete control over it has been so much fun. Like we've just felt like we've been able to kind of just start with a blank canvas, and we're just kind of iterating and over time, making adjustments along the way. So that's also been rewarding. And then for me personally, which has been somewhat shocking for me, but I've actually really enjoyed just the creative process. Like for whatever reason, I never thought of myself as a creative person. And I guess I've always associated being creative, like, being like an artist. But I've really enjoyed, coming up with these different topics to cover on the podcast. I've enjoyed, even coming up with the content to share on social media, which is also shocking for me, because even though I'm a millennial, I'm not really into social media like probably the rest of my or most of the rest of my generation. So I've really, like, this has been a huge learning curve for me doing this podcast. Like I've, learned some things about, social media and, all the different post types and, how to reach the audience better. And so, I've just learned so much about that, about what it takes to, record the podcast, edit the podcast, publish the podcast. I've learned just so many different tools on my own. So that's been rewarding, just kind of thinking about where I started, like not knowing how to do any of this, and then, seeing how I've, pushed myself to, learn all of these different things has been rewarding. And then also, my mom and I often say, like, we feel like this podcast is almost like a live journal for us,
Yeah.
because it's been really therapeutic for us. And so oftentimes she and I might be experiencing something in our own lives, and we find a way to tie that into the podcast. And so listeners may not notice this because they're not us, but whenever my mom and I listen, we actually kind of have an idea of what might have been going on with us
Yeah.
at that point in time. So yeah, it's been very therapeutic for us. And then lastly, I'd say, for me personally, I feel like this podcast has helped me to embrace my voice
Mhm.
more. I used to hate listening to myself speak.
Lots of people don't like that.
Yes. I just, it made me cringe. So of course, with doing a podcast, I had to get very comfortable listening to myself. And now I realize, hey, I don't sound as bad as I thought. So yeah, I think, doing the podcast and having to literally like listen to myself over and over and over again, I've really come to embrace my voice. I'm really comfortable with it now. So yeah, this podcast has really opened up a lot of things for me that I didn't expect, but I'm really grateful, that it's stretched me. It's certainly pushed me outside of my comfort zone. So
Yeah. Great.
yeah.
And then, so how can listeners learn more about Next Level You? What's the best way for them to kind of connect with it?
Yeah, so we are on all major podcast platforms. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Listeners can, just search Next Level U, and that's just like the letter U. And, I know there's like a lot of variations of Next Level out there, but our Next Level U, our logo is pretty distinctive. It's a bridge because our tagline is building the bridge between your now and your next. So if you find that bridge with the rough terrain on the left side and the green grass and trees on the right side with the bridge in the middle, then you've found us. And we're also on social media, so you all get to see me learn how to use social media in real time on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok. TikTok was one of our more recent platforms that we got into, and I was very afraid to get into that one. I had never used TikTok before Next Level U. So, but yeah, those are all of the platforms you can find us on. We have a link tree where we have links to all of our podcast platforms and social media. Yeah, that's how you can find us. Like I said, next level U, the letter U.
We'll be sure to link out to some of that in the show notes so people can follow up. Thank you again so much for taking the time to join the podcast today. Really appreciate it. Something we'd like to do with our alumni before you take off. Can we get to go Mean Green?
Go Mean Green.
Really appreciate Mayaria taking the time to talk with us and share her passion for helping others. Check the link in the show notes to learn more about Next Level U. Please take a second and let us know what you think about the show by emailing podcast@unt.edu or calling 940-565-4341. And help us grow by telling a friend about the show, sharing it on social media, or leaving us a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen. Until next time, we hope you have a happy Friday, North Texas, and go Mean Green. Happy Friday, North Texas is a production of the University of North Texas. Today's show was produced and edited by Scott Brown with original reporting by Scott Brown. For more information, visit unt.edu/podcast.